Jean-Sebastian Jacques, thank you for joining the business.
Good evening.
You say it's a time when protecting our air, water and land matter more than ever. Will you be throwing your considerable weight into pushing for a price on carbon?
Oh, that's a very good question. First of all, as Rio Tinto, we believe in climate change. And we've been very clear, we believe in the science. We've been using carbon pricing for many, many years. To be honest, as far as we're concerned, is if we could have a carbon pricing globally, because what we want is a level playing field, we would be absolutely delighted. All right. So our policies has not changed in that space. We believe in climate change. We believe in carbon pricing, and what we want is a level playing field.
You're a large, important Australian company, though. Will you be pressuring the government to make that a policy?
I'm not sure if the word pressuring is the right one. We will convey this message wherever is in power, in Australia, in the US, in Canada, wherever we operate, and China as an example as well, to make sure that all views are well understood, because this is an important issue that we have to face. We want, as Rio Tinto, but we want as a mining industry being part of the solution to climate change. Part of the solution will be by providing products like copper, like aluminium, just to give a few examples. Our policies are very clear, our position is very clear, and we'll make it very clear to whoever is in the office, wherever we operate.
You're obviously intimately involved in this issue and passionate about it. Do you think Australia will meet its Paris targets?
It's not for me to comment on this specific point. As I said, we want to be part of a solution, and we're working hard across all our operation in Australia in order to continue to improve our carbon footprint. That's the only thing I can say at this stage.
The recent report from the IPCC makes for pretty stark reading, and the risk of the world failing to meet its Paris targets and leading to dangerous climate change. Do you think the world is currently motivated enough to avoid those dangers?
Well, it's it's a hard question to answer, in the sense of we see dynamics which are very contrasted across different geographies. It's fair to say that some countries are taking a very strong position, leadership position. I was in China again 2 weeks ago, and it's clear that their blue sky policies is very strong, and they are very serious about implementing it. I can see in Canada lots of activities in that space. I really hope that everybody understands the situation, the criticality of the situations, and we all work together to make it happen. As I said, I really hope that Rio and more broadly the mining industry is seen as part of the solution, because without the copper, without the aluminium, without the bauxite, without the minerals required for the battery technology to support the electrical vehicle revolution, there won't be a solution. So we want to be part of it. As I said, we'll convey this message loud and clear wherever we operate.
Well, how do you think Australia compares to other countries when it comes to meeting its climate obligations?
Yeah, I think my frustration, if I'm honest, is really about the energy policies in Australia. Our position is very clear. We are technology agnostic, but what we want is a source which is reliable and low cost of energy, in order to make sure that we continue to produce, for example, aluminium across Australia, in order to be part of the solution. I have to say, we don't see a lot of momentum at this point in time in relation to tackling this energy crisis. Australia should be a fantastic country from an energy standpoint, and today the truth of the matter is the policies are not effective, and we'll continue to explain it to the government, whoever is in power here.
Now, you're suggesting that communities and governments should share the costs of setting up new mining ventures. What would that look like?
Yeah, I think the question I made, the point I made very clear this morning during the conference is to say, it's a broader point, is in the sense that if communities and governments want to have a bigger share of the pie, then, because mining is a very risky business, then they need to be ready to take more risk as well. And today, that's not the situation. So we need to have a very open conversation, to have a serious debate, and that's why there is a piece of work that we want to launch pretty quickly with the likes of the World Bank and the Harvard University and a few other stakeholders, in order to have a very honest and very grown-up conversation about how do we make sure we create more wealth, and how do we share the wealth. But people need to acknowledge, if you want to have a bigger share of the wealth, then you need to be ready to take more risk, because mining is a very capital-intensive industry. We're talking about billions and billions of dollars of upfront investment before we can even start sharing benefits. So what we're saying is, we don't have the solution per se as we're having this conversation, but what we want is to have this conversation, to start the debate, in order that we find a solution which is win-win for everybody.
Back in 2010, the Rudd government proposed a resource super profits tax. Now, under that model, the Commonwealth would guarantee to contribute 40% of the investment costs of a new resource project. So in effect, the community would share in the costs of and then the returns from realising that value in that resource deposit. Is that the kind of model that you think would work?
I won't make any specific comment about specific options here. That would be inappropriate. But what I've seen, what I've experienced globally, because Rio is a global company, is pretty often from a political standpoint, people are really keen to get the upside, but it's very difficult from a political standpoint in order to deal with the downside when there is a downside, right? Especially when the market goes south and so on and so forth. So, whatever idea is on the table, we are very open-minded. We will look at it, assess the benefits in order to find a way forward. But I won't make any specific comments on specific proposition at this point in time.
Is that a model you're acquainted with and one that you'd be willing to explore? It was a very politically charged battle back in 2010. Is it something we should look at again?
We're in 2018, situation is different. I believe the model that we have in Australia today, which is based on tax and royalties, is a very effective model. But that what works in Australia may not work in Mongolia, may not work in Indonesia, may not work in Africa. So I think from our perspective is every country has, or every region has a specific set of different situations, and we need to adapt in order to find the right solution for this country. I mean, just to give you an example, in Australia you've got already lots of infrastructure, whereas if we were to do a project in Africa or in Asia, maybe there is no infrastructure. So depending on the project, depending on the capital requirements, then the solution may be different.
You talked a lot today about trust and how mining suffers from a deficit of trust with the public. Do you think things like we saw in 2010, when we saw a very well-funded campaign by the mining industry to get rid of that mining super profits tax, damaged the trust with the public?
Well, my view is, I'm going to make a broader point here, is to say we fully acknowledge that we have not been very good at telling our story, telling our contribution, and that's why you saw a few days ago Rio Tinto did publish a pretty comprehensive report on our contribution. We asked a third party to produce it, so it's totally made in an independent way. And what you see is our contribution as Rio Tinto, and therefore as a mining business more generally in Australia, is very, very strong. If I look at Rio account for around 2.5% of the GDP, more than Tasmania. We account for 12%, nearly 12% of WA. We do account about 9,000 suppliers. We account for not only more than 20,000 employees directly, but if you look at our supply chain, more than 100,000 people working for Rio Tinto only. So our contribution is pretty significant. We contribute to the pension of most Australian people as well. And I don't say it in an arrogant way. That is a reality. But we have not been good at telling the story how we contribute directly and indirectly. And this is something that we need to change in order to explain in simple terms, not in technocratic language, if I may use this expression, simple word that everybody understands what we are doing, are we contributing in terms of jobs, in terms of procurement, in terms of training, and so on and so forth. But we've not been able to do it. We've not been good at it, and it has to change. And we will try to play our part. And I think the report that was issued a few days ago is a good example of it.
I understand you don't want to give specifics on exactly the sort of model you're suggesting, but given that this was the previous model suggested by one side of politics who might soon be the government, are you saying Rio would be open to having a conversation with them about a similar model to get the Commonwealth to buy into funding these sort of projects, something similar to the mining super profits tax?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, each geography is different. My sense is countries where the rule of law is well established, where infrastructure are well established. If I look at Canada, if I look at the US, or if I look at Australia as an example, I think my preference is for a situation where the government focuses on tax and royalties, because I think that's the most effective way in doing so. But in some other geographies, in Africa or in Asia, where the infrastructure is not there, where the capabilities of the people are not there, and where therefore we need to invest for the long terms, not only in terms of capital, but in terms of investment, in terms of capabilities on the ground, then the model will be different. That's what we're saying.
So that specific comment about you wanting communities and governments to help fund mining projects, you weren't speaking specifically about Australia.
I think it's a broader point across the industry, because what's happening is, and we see it across all countries, or most of the countries, is what people describe as resource nationalism is on the high. I mean, it has been there forever, but the intensity is very significant, and it happens across all geographies. And I fully understand why communities and government wants to have a bigger share of the cake, but at the same time, they need to acknowledge in the mining businesses, we invest for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, we invest billions and billions of dollars up front, and it takes a lot of time to get the money back and to share the benefits. So what we want is a proper conversation on what people want and how we share the risk and the reward. That's the only thing I'm saying today.
We've seen the US market tank today after reports that the US administration will announce by early December that it will place tariffs on all remaining Chinese imports. What's that going to do to the Chinese economy?
Yeah, you know, it's a very good question. I was in China 2 weeks ago with 60 of the leaders of Rio Tinto, and what we saw was very impressive. You got a very strong economy. Is the Chinese economy slowing down? Absolutely. But you know, remember, they're still growing between 6 and 7% per annum, and it's pretty significant. If all countries on planet Earth were growing at 6 or 7% per annum, then you know, the economy, the global economy, would be much, much stronger. Are we overly concerned by the Chinese situation? The answer is no. However, we acknowledge that there is a high level of uncertainty and volatility, and what it means for Rio Tinto is very simple. Let's focus on what we can control. It's about our cost position, it's about the quality of our product, it's about the quality of our relationship with our customers, and maintaining a very strong balance sheet. That's what it is about, that's what we're doing.
Are you seeing suggestions that the Chinese might increase their infrastructure spend in order to offset those headwinds in their export earnings? And will that help Rio, do you think?
So I think that's a very interesting question. What we see on the ground is that China is putting more money into the system, including infrastructure at the provincial level, which is a good piece of news for Rio, but for the mining industry in general. That's one aspect. But if you look forward, there are two key drivers for the Chinese economy, which will be important. One is the electrical vehicle revolution in a consistent way with their blue sky strategy, or the equivalent of climate change. And clearly, I'm absolutely convinced that China will take a leadership role, which means additional demand for copper, for bauxite and aluminium, and minerals for the battery technology, which is all great piece of news for Australia as an example. That's one aspect. The second aspect, which is more uncertain or unclear at this point in time, is their One Belt, One Road initiative, which will mean further investment in infrastructure in Asia and in Africa as well. And I can see here again some upside for Rio Tinto, for the mining industry, and definitely for Australia. So all in all, it could be a bumpy ride in the short term with uncertainty and volatility, but as far as we're concerned, if we focus on the cost, on the quality of our product, the quality of relationship with our customers and our balance sheet, we should be fine and continue to deliver what we committed to the market, which is to create value for shareholders in the short, medium and long term. And if I step back, what we have delivered in the last 18 months is a good example of it. $10 billion US dollars of return last year, and $7 billion of return declared for the first 6 months of this year.
Jean-Sébastien Jacques, thank you for joining the business.
You're welcome. Thank you.